As we get into unpredictable systems, what the scary thing is we don't know when system shifts can happen. We just don't understand nature well enough. We're still, rookies when it comes to our understanding of ecology. And we can get major shifts in very small amounts of time when it comes to some of these things. And that's the concern that we have in front of us. It's easy to point to examples like the passenger pigeon that we eliminated, the species that we extirpate or kill off entirely. But the reality is that that's not the major issue in the Canadian context. It's the changes that are slow and subtle, and then sometimes our phase shifts. They shift from A to B overnight, and cod was a really good example of that. We thought we had it in abundance, and all of a sudden it was gone practically. And it's taking a long time to recover, and we don't know whether it will entirely, because a new system sets up, and different predators come in, and you may never get back to that. So the days of pulling cod out of the ocean in the Grand Banks with buckets may simply just be gone. We may not be able to get it back because we've got a totally different system. Now, maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, because we've got more lobster out there now, which is a good thing for the economy in many ways. But is that the future that we want to have? Do we value lobster more than we do cod? I don't know. I don't have an answer to that, but it's a question for Canadians. There are some good news stories again. Canada does have generally good policy when it comes to biodiversity conservation. And one of the stories that is buried in the report is the fact that bird species, and forest bird species in particular, are showing positive trends. While some other bird species are on the decline, forest birds are actually doing quite well, which is a good thing. And overall, since the 1970s, as I said at the beginning, even though we've seen sort of that decline over the past few years, that may just simply be a temporal thing. And since the 1970s, we're relatively stable, which is a good thing. When we compare that to what's going on in the tropical parts of the world, our biodiversity is doing incredibly well, because biodiversity in other parts of the planet is plummeting. So our species are relatively stable overall, with the exception of some of the populations. So the upshot, in kind of Aldo Leopold fashion, and as I said, I like to point to the positive signs in all of this, because I don't think it is all doom and gloom. And it's easy to get the soundbite and the media clip, and you get people's attentions when you say the sky is falling. But the truth is that the sky isn't entirely falling on this stuff. Canada is a very good steward, and we've got a lot of natural capital at the end of the day. And so the question is kind of how we manage that. There are signs of positive change, whether that is communities and citizens becoming more aware of these issues. Civil society organizations, the nonprofits out there, not only are there more of them than ever, but they're stronger. They're getting an increasing voice. They're bigger. They're having a bigger impact. A really good example, there's an organization in Canada called the Nature Conservancy of Canada, and recently they made a land acquisition out in BC that is a huge swath of land called Darkwoods, and they're putting that into conservation. That's something, it was hundreds of millions of dollars, and that 15, 20 years ago was just something we weren't thinking about. Companies are really beginning to take action, and people get really cynical when, and I work a lot with the big Fortune 500 companies, when people get very cynical when you say, big business is actually on board on this. I'll tell you, big business is on board with this, and I'm a hardcore greenie enviro, but and it's not to say that they're doing everything perfectly, but they get it. They finally get it. And they're taking action. And when we can leverage business behind a lot of these actions, it really begins to change things. You see that manifesting through the fact that you've got concentrated tide. That's what it's manifesting in. And that's resulting in less water use for you guys. Levi's, I just got back from a meeting with them. They are now putting labels on their jeans about how to manage the jeans, how to use the jeans, because the impact that they have as a company actually is in how their product gets used. But how do they control that? How do they influence that? And what they're trying to do is say, hey, don't wash your jeans as much. You can actually even stick them in the freezer to kill them. If they're not physically dirty and they just smell, you can actually stick them in the freezer. And that will actually get rid of the smell. And it expands the life cycle of those jeans. They will last longer. And then they're saying, send them back to the Goodwill when you're done with them to try and give them a second life. And so companies are really beginning to take action. And I could sit here all day and rhyme off examples of those sorts of things. But that, for me, is a really positive trend. In addition to that, I've mentioned a few examples of the fact that governments are taking on new tools and new approaches. And that's where we as citizens also really need to kind of continue to push them, continue to encourage them and support them as they take kind of bold leaps on some of these things. It was a major risk for Gordon Campbell in the BC context to put in the carbon tax. That was really unpopular because it was a carbon tax, right? It was like, tax is bad. But a lot of people held firm on that. It was an important thing, and it's resulted in him being able to lower business taxes, being able to lower income taxes for citizens. And that's the upshot of it. And it's ultimately been a positive thing, I think, for BC and for BC companies. So as those new tools get tried out, I think that's something that we really need to support, and that's particularly pertinent in a period like this where we've got elections going on. So the tools and knowledge are available out there. We get how to do a lot of these things. It's just a matter of willpower, and it's a matter of questions. So the fact of the matter is that we've done this before. We've solved these kinds of problems before. We know how to do it. We've got the kinds of tools, and it's really just a matter of saying, what is the future that we want in front of us? What is well-being to us, and what do we value? So I'll end my presentation with a few ideas for positive change. You'll see a lot of these. Many of them have manifested in the examples that I spoke about. The fact that we're rethinking stewardship, and that we need to continue to do that. Not just think of it as, I generate lumber as a forester, but rather I steward forests, and those forests not only produce timber for me, but they clean the air, they clean the water, they maintain these things, they provide livelihoods to people, they generate berries, they have all of these other benefits, these ecosystem services. And think about ourselves as stewards of the land rather than just foresters or tomato growers, because that's not the only thing that really is of value. Thinking about enforcement of environmental policy. In many cases, we've got great laws. It's just a matter of providing the capacity for people to enforce those laws. Uptaking the principles of environmental economics. I've mentioned a few examples. The carbon tax is a good one. There are many other ones that are out there. But thinking about how we can incentivize through either subsidies or taxes, or disincentivize, people to take the right actions. Make it easy for people to be good environmental stewards. I mentioned already about environmental data. There's a need to kind of maintain environmental data. There's a lot of areas of Canada where we just don't have the information or the data. And that's a real problem because we manage what we monitor and what we measure. And if the environment really matters to us, then we need to measure that. For our individual citizens, I think there's an important element of around relocalizing. Thinking about, in an area like this, it's fantastic because you can go to the farmers markets in St. Jacobs. You can get milk, you can get honey, you can get vegetables for a huge chunk of the year. Do those sorts of things. Support local economies. It's a way of really reducing your impact in many ways. Reduce and reuse. Don't buy as much, or when you do, try and buy things secondhand. You can turn over your wardrobe with far less environmental impact if you're buying secondhand clothing. But in addition to that, buy quality. And that's something that I don't know that it always gets the play that it needs to, because high quality things, not only they're better, they look nicer if it's clothing or shoes or whatever, but they last longer. And lasting longer is really important. In addition to that, they can often be repaired. So repair things, because that's how you lower your footprint, making things last longer. Spend your money for positive change, support the companies, support the efforts, and the same thing goes for voting as well. Vote for positive change, whether it's politically, economically, or otherwise. Eating lower on the food chain, vegetables, and smaller animals is generally the kind of rule of thumb because they require less energy. Those animals use less water, less energy, less resources to be grown. And so it's something like 70,000 liters goes into 1 kilogram of beef, but it's far, far less when it comes to other things. And so thinking about that. Sharing resources, carpooling, great example of sharing resources. But do every single person need their own lawnmower, or can you borrow yours? Because you're not mowing your lawn every day if you have a lawn. So think about communal sharing of resources. And at the end of the day, continue to learn and pay it forward. And you guys are certainly here learning, I hope, at least a little bit. And I encourage you to pay that forward. Pass on a few of these tidbits to other people, because that's how change happens. So in conclusion, Canada is not a country in crisis, but there are some interesting signs that are emerging, and we need to be aware of those because they're the things that are going to, those are the questions that are being asked, and it's our future to decide on that front. We are blessed with a lot of natural capital. We've got a lot of stuff here, but because of that, we kind of take it for granted, and we become, just high users. And it's not only us, as time goes on, that needs to use those resources. We're only a fraction percentage of the population on the entire planet, but we're a huge percentage of the land mass. And there are a lot of countries out there that are looking to our resources to sustain populations as we move towards 9 billion. And we need to think about that as global stewards. And I put economic in brackets, but really the societal model that we've got is a little bit broken. We need to really think about the full impacts of our actions, and that's our economics, our political systems. A lot of those things need rethinking because we need to make and be the change that we want to be. And I think as we move towards efforts like the Canadian Index of Wellbeing and really holistically evaluating what is the future that we want and how are we going to measure that, we need to think about metrics beyond just the economic side of things. And I think the final point around the fact that we do have the tools, capacity, and so forth to do this. And each of you have within your own hands the abilities to make a difference and to drive that sort of change. So I encourage you to do that. And I'm really excited to see the Canadian Index of Wellbeing kind of continue to grow forward from here because I do hope it begins to change the dialogue on this sort of stuff as we move forward. So with that, I will say thank you, and if you are looking for more information, the full report is available on the Canadian Index of Wellbeing website. And thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions.